Alright guys, so when I last time posted a guide for chapter 9 episode 11, I had to use an SSR Recollection, which basically increase your ultimate gaining speed. There was some feedbacks in my channel which basically saying that it's a lot harder when you don't actually have that, which is true. So I went back and revisited this chapter and now have came up with a strategy without using that. And in fact, I would like to say this strategy is really accessible, free to play friendly, because as you can see, the only SSR here is going to be my Gojo. And even though my Gojo is duped as well, you will see in my later on gameplay that you can definitely do it a lot easier than what I had. I obviously can't downgrade my Gojo, so that's kind of the reason why it's kind of I'm showing my gameplay as it is. Now, if you want it for reference in terms of the skill levels on all of my characters, this is it. As you can see, my Gojo is really strong. It is at level 7 buff and ultimate. However, once again, you will see in my gameplay, you can actually use 2 ult in this battle, and I pretty much already almost killed the boss before I even get to use my second ult. So that's why I'm pretty confident you can beat it a lot earlier than whatever level I had hit. And also, you would have noticed the recollection I have on my Gojo is not leveled up at all. So once again, if you need to compensate the damage output on Gojo even further, you could actually change it to this SSR recollection instead. And I will kind of talk about the choices of why those two recollections a bit later on when I actually talk about the strategy. Now, the other thing I would also gonna point out is you can see I have Miwa here with no recollection. Basically, you don't actually need this character if your damage output is gonna be enough. So basically, if you can get away with equipping this R recollection on Gojo, then what you can do is you can actually just play Nanami in the spot instead, and you don't need to do anything else. The only reason why I still played Miwa in my first team and Nanami as a backup is just in case the scenario when the damage output is not enough and you actually want to swap into this recollection instead. And because this is an SSR recollection that you can actually obtain through the Formidable Foe game mode in this game, this is something you're guaranteed to get, and it's not a bad one for you to level up either. So that's kind of the only reason why I chose Miwa in the first place, in case you need to make that adjustment. Okay, so what is the strategy exactly? The strategy is still pretty similar to the one I had previously. Basically, you want to use your ultimate as early as possible and hopefully even 2 ultimate in the same battle. And because you do not have access to that SSR recollection, which give speed up everyone's ultimate gauge, now what you have to do instead is you have to use your skills 2 on Toge to increase the ultimate energy on everyone. And because you need this to actually work twice in a row, that's kind of why it's very important for protect your whole team against enemy attack as much as possible. Now there are 4 enemy attacks, and if you actually pull everything off correctly, you should be able to have your ult ready by turn 4. So basically there will be the first 3 turns where the enemy will be attacking you, and because there are 4 enemies, that will be 12 attacks against you, and basically you need to yourself a way to protect against that. And that's kind of why this R recollection is going to be your best choice here, because basically what you need to know on Gojo is that Gojo is immune to any damage. All of the enemies in this stage are single target attacks, and basically what this recollection is able to do, even though it's low rarity, it applies draw attack, which is a taunt to yourself for 2 turns. So even though you have to survive for 3 turns so that you can ult on turn 4, you will be taunting all of the enemy's attacks for the first 2 turns, and as a result you only have to tank 4 attacks against the enemy, and that's a lot more achievable, even though as you will see later on in my gameplay, my characters are not very high level. So that's kind of why I have this R recollection on. Now the only downside of this recollection is that it increases your physical technique rather than curse technique, whereas you will see the attacks I use on Gojo is mainly going to be my skill 1, which is a curse technique, and also ultimate, which is another curse technique, and the buffing skill obviously. But basically as a result, it doesn't really matter how much I level up this, it would never actually benefit my Gojo. So that's kind of why I say if you actually have to level up your recollection, you would then need to swap this out to this one instead. Now this is the one that you get for free in Formidable Foe. I already have guides on this on my channel. I'll post the link in the description below as well if you do want to reference that on how to clear it and get this Recollection. But basically the problem with this one is that unlike the previous one, which actually draw attack for 2 turns, this one draw attack for 2 times. So if you actually think about it, for the first 2 turns the enemy will be making 8 attacks. So if I was using that lower rarity, the R Recollection, I am effectively nullifying 8 of enemy attacks. Whereas if I use this, I am only nullifying 2 of the enemy attacks. So that's kind of why it's not as good. However, if you actually have Miwa instead, what you can do is you can also equip this Recollection on Miwa. And this is also going to help you if you do decide to use this one, because basically what you can do is you can use Miwa's skill 2, which first of all taunt as well, but also apply dodge to herself for 1 turn, and then on top of that you also have a dodge on her Recollection, which is also for 1 turn. So basically what that means is that you will be taunting with Miwa first of all for 2 attacks, which she will be able to dodge, and also at times she will be killed off on the 3rd attack to swap in your Nanami. So that basically means in the first 8 turns you will be able to effectively get rid of 3 of the enemy attacks with Miwa and her Recollection, and get rid of 2 attacks using Gojo and his Recollection. So yes, you are still not going to be as good as the first Recollection that I was showing you. You're not going to be as effective as using this Recollection, because this Recollection is for 2 whole turns. It's not going to be as good as that, but still, you are still going to be able to avoid 5 of the enemy attack out of the 8 in the first 2 turns. So that's still going to be good enough, especially if you do want to have that bit of extra damage by actually leveling up your SSR Recollection. So that's kind of going to be the strategy that you want to do. Now, the other thing you also want to know is you want to preferably get Yaga to dupe 2 so that he has a bit more curse energy, so he can stack up buff a bit more. Otherwise, you can also do what I do. In fact, if you have dupe, then both dupe him and also use a Recollection, which is able to give plus 10 curse energy. So that's basically just ensuring that you can stack up buff as much as you can as early on as possible, because Gojo will be using his ult on turn 4, so you kind of want as much buff as possible in the first 4 turns. And then in terms of Toge, similar kind of thing. Toge needs to use his skill 2 at least twice in the first 3 turns, so as a result he needs to have plus 10 curse energy, and that can either be done by getting him to dupe 2, or once again using SR Recollection, which gives plus 10 curse energy. And then if you have already made sure you fulfill those requirements by giving them as much curse energy as possible, then the next thing you want to do is just equipping them with any Recollection which is able to give a bit of extra buff. So for example, this one, which is able to give a bit of a buff on what do you call it? 15% buff to all allies for 2 turns, and then I also have this one which doesn't actually give buff by itself, but if you actually have a dupe, it gives a 10% curse technique increase to all allies as well. So that's kind of why the reason why I have those on. Alright, so this is gonna be my gameplay of how I beat it. So let's start off with the team. As you can see, I have what I was showing earlier. I had a different Recollection while I was actually doing the run, but as I mentioned, if you actually equip this R rarity Recollection, then it doesn't really matter what you have here on Miwa. In fact, you don't even have to have Miwa, you can just put Nanami directly in the team. But yeah, let's just go into the battle itself now. I just kind of show you how all of the taunting works, etc. So start off the battle, there are 4 enemies on their side. What you want to do is start buffing on your Yaga. Toge would obviously try to increase everyone's curse and ultimate energy. Miwa will be taunting, but it doesn't really matter since Gojo will be able to taunt anyway for the first 2 turns. So you can see Miwa being dead, and all of the enemy then follow up with attacking my Gojo instead. And because Miwa is dead, Nanami gets substituted in. Now on turn 2, Toge wouldn't have enough curse energy to use his skill 2, so just do a random normal attack. Nanami will be start buffing now as well, and your Gojo should be start buffing from turn 2. And that's because his buff lasts for 3 turns. So in order to get the most out of his ult on turn 4, you really want to buff yourself on turn 2 and turn 3. So that's basically what I do. And also basically on turn 1, what you want to do is do a bit of chip damage on the boss, by the way. Okay, so now on turn 3, repeat as usual. Toge would now have enough curse energy to buff everyone's ult again, so that's great. And as you can see, my Gojo basically charge up his ult by the end of turn 3. Now, what you have noticed here is that because on turn 3, the taunt is no longer there, my character is now starting to get attacked. But as you can see, I'm still able to tank quite well, especially because the enemies in this stage are actually weak against red, which is basically the color of Nanami and Yaga, so that's kind of why I'm able to tank pretty well, even though I'm only like level 50 or level 60. Basically, just try to go for like a lucky run where the enemy doesn't end up like attacking your Toge. In fact, it doesn't even matter if they end up attacking Toge, because Toge already done his work. Well, I mean, Toge done his work for the first ult, but if Toge was still alive, Toge can potentially help you to get the second ult. So, just try to avoid all of the enemies start attacking Toge and kill him off. So you should still be able to tank this fairly easily. Especially because remember, on turn 3, Toge used his skill 2, which is a damage reduction as well. Okay, so now on turn 4, ult is ready. I'll obviously just be using the ult. No need for me to increase the special attack yet on Toge. You want to use that later on or after Gojo already finishes up so that you can actually increase the energy again. Use any Recollection buff just to make sure you do as much damage as possible on the ult. Now here's the ult. It will obviously kill off the other 3 weaker enemies and will do a huge chunk on the boss. It wasn't crit, so that's kind of why I wasn't able to break it, but no worries there, because now what I can do is I can prepare myself for my second ult and also break the enemy. And the idea is quite simple, to be honest. Like, if you manage to break the enemy, that better means you happen to do a lot of damage, which is nice. If you haven't managed to break the enemy, then by breaking the enemy, you are going to get loads of ult energy back, which then prepares you for your second ult. So it kind of like wins no matter what. Now on this turn, I can't remember which turn it is, but basically what you notice is that I ran out of curse energy to buff on Yaga and Nanami. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use their combo attack. And because the enemy is weak against red, this combo attack is actually going to do pretty decent damage as well. Okay, now you can see the boss is pretty much almost already dead, and by attacking him this turn, I have my ult ready as well on my Gojo. So that's kind of why I was saying, like, you can see you can definitely kill the boss off even if you are nowhere near as high level as what my Gojo is.